Hello YouTube and welcome back to Arguments Mapped. Today we're going to be trying something that could very easily get very messy. We're going to try to map a Jubilee video. Now, I've wanted to map one of these for a long time just because they're one of the most popular way to consume debates. This one came out 3 days ago. It's already got 3.5 million views. There have been some famous ones that have gotten over 20 million views. When it comes to pop culture debates in the modern day, this is really the pinnacle. So this one has Candace Owens. It's titled One Conservative versus 20 Feminists. So how this video is structured is Candace Owens is going to make 4 ultimate claims. What's actually going to happen is she's going to have her ultimate claim, and she's going to have people challenging her on that ultimate claim. So people are going to argue with her ultimate claim, and while they argue with the ultimate claim, we get to see Candace's reasoning for stating that ultimate claim. So when it comes to debates that I've mapped on this channel, this will be the most unorthodox in structure, but I think it's important to meet people where they're at, and this is like the most popular form of, I guess, pop debate that is out there right now. So the goal of this video is to map out the arguments, and at the end of it all, we can see if we think that this video was actually productive, if it contributed anything to the discourse, or if it's a bunch of sensationalist garbage. And this is going to be structured like the other videos, mostly my summary, and then clips of the videos when relevant, when necessary, when I don't want to just quote word for word somebody, I'll just play the clip. So yeah, like and subscribe if you enjoy the video, and let's get into it. So Candace Owens first introduces herself as a podcaster, mother, wife, and author of the upcoming book called Make Him a Sandwich. And her first claim is going to be that the sexual revolution has devalued women and made them infinitely less happy. Now, the sexual revolution is famous for a lot of things. I think 3 of the biggest ones that I want to bring up that are getting hit here are birth control, homosexuality, and abortion. But there's an infinite number of things wrapped up in this. So we will just see how she uses the term when she's debating people. All right, so the first challenger here is Samaya. Samaya opens with a statistic saying that 60% of women who are murdered by their intimate partners. And then she brings up that the sexual revolution allowed for women to kind of leave the home. Before the sexual revolution, the women just kind of stayed home. They weren't super social. At the very least, the sexual revolution increased access for women to the social public sphere. Here's a quote from her: "Without the sexual revolution, women would be confined to the place where they are in much more danger." So I'm going to throw this on the board just before we get to Candace's rebuttal, just because this is actually pretty cut and dry. We're going to have Candace's ultimate claim here. All right, so we're going to have it like this. We have Candace in blue, and we have any detractors in yellow. I'm not going to differentiate between the argumentators who go against Candace. So we have Candace's main claim here being the sexual revolution has devalued women and made them infinitely less happy. The objection is 60% of women who are murdered by their intimate partners. Taken with, the sexual revolution increased women's ability to escape these harmful situations. And she says that this makes them more happy. And she says that women no longer being confined to these harmful environments will increase their happiness. So that's a direct objection to the second half of the main claim here. I'll just add that in. So yeah, this is essentially what we got so far. Candace's immediate response was that lesbian relationships are statistically the most violent, and Samaya says that this isn't true and that she's misquoting statistics. By the way, lesbians weren't really a part of this. I guess if you want to assume some sort of line of logic, she's going off of the sexual revolution made it more normalized for lesbians to exist, but it does not logically interact with any of these claims. And also, it was misquoting the statistic. Jubilee actually puts the statistic on the screen. Yeah, so you can see it here. A survey from 2013 shows 61% of bisexual women and 44% of lesbian women reported intimate partner violence compared to 35% of straight women, according to the Stand for Families Free of Violence. So it seems Candace is factually incorrect here anyways, that the bisexual women are more likely to experience violence than the lesbian or straight women. So since this is really unimportant to the big picture argument, and if I were to map every little weird statistic that's thrown out in a Jubilee video, the review at the end would be horrible. We're just not going to map that. So then Candace walks it back, and then she kind of says that, of course, intimate relationships are going to breed violence, and then she kind of generalizes it. She says it doesn't actually matter, like whether it's a lesbian relationship or a straight relationship. She speaks as if she's objecting to something, but she doesn't actually directly object to any of these three things here. And then right before the time runs out, she goes on and starts talking about how, you know, the sexual revolution made women have to go into the workplace, or at least be able to go into the workplace. And she says the workplace didn't make them happy. So we can map that as a supporting reason from her for the ultimate conclusion. And yeah, right after she says that, the time runs out, or the people vote out the first lady, and then we're moving on to the next person. All right, so now we get to Julian, and we actually had very little from Candace here. This was mainly Julian giving their spiel. Julian opens by saying they wanted to talk about how values work in a gender binary, and wonders how we place value on human beings. They say that when the placing of value comes from a place of power, giving the example of Victorian society, that diminishes the value of other humans. They say that what the sexual revolution did was allow people to seek out empowerment, and empowerment gives people value. So we'll have that over here, and then Candace doesn't really object to this at all, and Julian keeps going right into another point, which is the sexual revolution helped to normalize sex education, and sex education helps us to decrease STIs, abuse, and sexual assault. And again, Candace did not directly object to any of this stuff. All that she said was that Julian was working within the realm of queer theory, which is separate from feminist theory, and was essentially saying that because Julian is using a much more kind of fluid definition of womanhood, that then Julian just didn't have the ability to interact with this ultimate claim here, honestly. But that's more so an objection to the person even dealing with the issue. It is not an objection to any of these claims here. And then Julian gets voted out, and we go on to the next person. You can see even more than Hitchens and Lennox, we have a very like a horizontal argument here. Some of these arguments are multifaceted, right? They're not single standing points, but there's just a smattering of reasons here, really. Also, Candace never actually gets into an objection because the opponent of hers is always voted out when she starts talking. So that's this may be hindering our ability to flesh out these arguments. Okay, now we get to Xena, and Xena is, in my opinion, the most interesting one yet, because she immediately starts trying to get Candace to like narrow her positions or be more clear. She first hones in on Candace's notion of value and tries to get Candace to further define how she's using value. She also wants to know to what extent does a woman's sexual practice define her value. And we get some clarifying from Candace here. She says that in her opinion, people having multiple partners devalues them. She says that men and women define their value in pertinence to one another, which is interesting. And the biggest claim here to understand how Candace is using the word happiness is what makes women actually happy is family. And she keeps repeating this claim over and over again, that this is like the ultimate goal. This is kind of the telos to Candace Owens' notion of happiness. So I guess you could take that two ways, right? You could take it as a definition of how she's using the word happiness, or you could take it as a claim that family is what actually makes women happy. And that's not a definition of happiness, that's a condition that brings about happiness. So Xena kind of takes it as the latter statement, and she brings up the Nordic countries. The Nordic countries have consistently ranked like the highest for happiness. And they also have like the most, I guess, liberal sexual norms. Because the sexual revolution wasn't a before and after event, it was a movement that affected different countries differently. And the Nordic countries were more affected by it than we were. They were more influenced by it. And Xena is saying, well, if the Nordic countries are happier than us, and they're not using this notion of happiness that is essentially the antithesis of how they seem to be reaching happiness, How does that parse for Candace? And Candace responds by saying that behavioral science is fake. I kid you not, that is essentially, she did actually say that. So even though she's cited behavioral science studies already, she's saying for this specific claim that behavioral science was proven to be fake in 2023 because there was a controversy over some Harvard professor fabricating papers. Therefore, all of behavioral science is fake, I guess. And this is kind of as far as we got before Xena got voted out. So let's go in and map this. What I'm going to first have is Candace's clarifying as a reason to support her ultimate conclusion, because it does function like that. All right, so these two things taken together are kind of supporting Candace's ultimate conclusion. What makes women happy is family, and the sexual revolution made it acceptable to not be in a family, or I guess it led to more people not being in a family. And then we have Xena's objection to Claim 10, saying that Nordic countries are less family-centered, and they're more happy than us. And then we have Candace's objection to that behavioral science is fake, or at the very least unreliable. But she did actually say, like, behavioral science is fake, so I don't want to be overly gracious. And then she also has a separate objection to Claim 12, because Nordic countries have a higher suicide rate. And she says that since, behavioral science is unreliable, we should look at other factors to kind of analyze happiness. And Candace says we should look at the suicide rate to analyze happiness. And right before Xena gets voted out, she makes a really interesting claim that suicide rates might not be accurate markers of happiness. But yeah, so we actually got a little bit of verticality here, you can see. So I appreciate Xena a lot for this. Okay, after Xena, we have Nikki, and I can't believe they voted out Nikki so soon, because Nikki is extremely, systemic here. So, the first thing that Nikki says is that to devalue is to objectify, kind of building on the idea that as we lose empathy with something, we're more likely to see it in a purely functional object sense than to see it as another human being. Nikki says that because the sexual revolution gives women more value, it thus objectifies them less or reduces their objectification. And then she says that since rape has decreased by about 50% since the 1950s, this is a signifier that women have actually been given more value because, she says, rape is spurred by objectification, not lack of sexual gratification. So she says that the real causal agent in rape being widespread is not just some, men wanting to rape, but it's more so how do men view women at the time. So Candace hones in on one aspect of this, which is that Candace says that women are much more objectified today than they were in the 1950s. And the way that Candace uses objectification is different than Nikki's use of objectification. Candace is talking about commodification. Candace essentially says, you look at the 50s, women are very modest in the 50s. You look at now, women are much less modest than they were in the 50s. Therefore, women are clearly objectified more. And Nikki essentially says that's not really what I'm talking about. Nikki also points out that Candace is catering to a romanticized version of the past, which doesn't really deal with reality. Then they vote her out. I don't know why they voted her out. I wanted to hear her flesh out this system a little bit more, because I think it was a really interesting angle. But let's map the little bit that we do have. All right, so let's look at what Nikki laid out here. So rape rates are a viable way to determine objectification of women. Taken with, rape rates have gone down since the sexual revolution. Therefore, it is not true that the sexual revolution has devalued women and made them infinitely less happy. To support this, she gives that rape is caused mainly by objectification of the victim. Candace Owens objects to 15 and says that women are more objectified now than the 1950s, so this is not true. Essentially, this cannot be true. And Nikki objects to this by saying that this is not true and uses a false definition of objectification that focuses only on sexual commodification. And yeah, that's what Nikki contributed. I wish she was on for longer. I thought this was really good. All right, Whitney, who is the last contestant here, starts off good, and then it just devolves into slop. So what Whitney starts off by saying is that Whitney wants to know if Candace has a connection in her conception of happiness between happiness and freedom. And Candace essentially pivots this by starting to talk about financial freedom, women entering into the financial sphere and how that can be stressful, and how she views that as a hindrance to happiness. They talk for a little bit more, but there's really no substance. So we can go and map this. This is kind of like a more generalized version of... It's a more generalized version of this one right here. All right, so I have it mapped as this. Claim 20 is the sexual revolution gives women more freedom. Taken with more freedom means more happiness. And this is the falsification condition for it made them infinitely less happy. Candace Owens' response to this is that women having to deal with finances makes them less happy. And then she got voted out really quick. And now we move on to the next ultimate claim. So overall, I mean, very horizontal so far, right? I mean, all this stuff is just like this. But proportionately, I think the most interesting ones have been the ones that actually get a little bit of depth. I do like this. I just think this one could be expanded upon a lot more. So hopefully we get a little bit more depth in the upcoming ultimate claim. All right, up next is John. John is kind of a nothing burger. He doesn't really add that much to the conversation, but this does give us the opportunity to map Candace's ultimate conclusion, and we can write down one of the defenses that Candace gives. So what we get here, this is Candace's current ultimate conclusion. No career will give women as much joy and fulfillment as raising children, and she supports this by saying raising children is biologically inherent, while other avenues in the pursuit of fulfillment are not. So, and one hypothetical that they get into is like, John brings up the idea of what if a girl from a really young age wants to be an author and she doesn't really want to have kids, and Candace just says that having kids is biological, whereas being an author is not biological, and therefore you would choose the kid. I will say, we can get something out of this, whereas there is an implicit claim here that Candace is not saying that what is biologically natural will coincide with joy and fulfillment. And yeah, let's get on to the next one. All right, up next was Jasmine, and Jasmine didn't interact with the ultimate conclusion either. Just more mud-flinging, talking over each other. Boy, big nothing burger. I mean, take a look at this. Take into account that there were other side tangents and stuff, right? But this is really the only substance that I got from... and this is, by the way, that was the last person on the second ultimate claim. So this is 20 minutes. 20 minutes they skirted around the ultimate conclusion. They did not address it. They talk in tangentially related things, and they just kind of like culture war mudfling for 20 whole minutes. And it's just really trash. I mean, I don't think anybody watching was getting anything out of this. So yeah, at least we had some interesting stuff in claim number 1. Because claim number 2, I encourage anyone who doubts how unsubstantial I'm saying that this is, go watch it for yourself. Try to find them actually interacting with the ultimate conclusion here. But we're going to move on to claim 3 now, and hopefully we can get some substance, you know, at least 3 arguments down vertically. I'm praying for that. Okay, so I thought I recorded this, but apparently I didn't. I'll just give you a brief rehash of the first person on the third claim. This was Princella, and this is what we got. So Candace's third ultimate conclusion is that we live under a matriarchy, not a patriarchy. And she says that a patriarchy is a system run by men that disadvantages women because men run things. And she also says that women are not disadvantaged because they can vote, and therefore we live under a matriarchy, not a patriarchy. Princella says that a patriarchy this is a difference in definition. Patriarchy is a system in which men make the laws and run the government, and men make up the majority of the House of Representatives and the Senate. Candace says that this is a biological difference, which, as we'll get into soon, would just technically mean that it's a biological patriarchy. Candace seems to think that like a biological patriarchy is like conflating terms, like you can't have a biological patriarchy. And then another point that Candace says to support her ultimate conclusion is that women are taken more seriously in complaints than men. She references things like the Me Too movement, where when a bunch of women come out with concerns, they're taken quite seriously, whereas She says if a bunch of men were to come and do this, they would not be taken as seriously. Princella grants this, but says that this is media, not government, and that patriarchy deals strictly with government. After Princella, who is quite good, I'm kind of sad that I lost my recording on that, we have Evan. Evan gives another definition of patriarchy, so we've got 3 definitions of patriarchy floating around here. He defines patriarchy as a system in which men hold the most power by political, economic, and social criteria. He says that what Candace is essentially saying is that there's a natural patriarchy, that biologically women just want to be subservient in regards to how much influence they have. Candace brings up something that she thinks supports her ultimate conclusion, which is that women hold more power because they earn less than half as much, but make 70 to 80% of spending decisions, which the fact check said was true. So we can map this. This is relevant. I'm actually going to add it as a third claim in this bunch because I think it works quite well as that. So I'm going to have it as men running things does not mean women are disadvantaged, as evidenced by spending. After that, Evan starts kind of pushing a little bit harder on Candace's idea of what is biologically, inherent. This idea that the difference that we see in terms of governmental representation of men versus women is biological. Evan wants to push back against that, and he asks Candace if she thinks that interests are innate. And Candace at first says that she does believe that interests are innate and that the disparities are just differences of interest. But then she changes and she says that there are pressures that act on interests and that the disagreement that they were having was over where the pressures are coming from. I don't think that really ties into the map that well. I suppose we can note whenever we view this biological difference that Candace no longer seems to believe that biological drives are simply innate. She now seems to think that interests are motivated by some external qualities. Up next is Paris, and Paris kind of begins by giving another definition of a patriarchy. A patriarchy is a society that is preferential to men, so very rudimentary up in the air definition here. She says that men are more violent towards women than the inverse. This does address, or at least this is said as if it's addressing the ultimate claim, so I will map it. All right, so Paris says that men are more violent towards women than the inverse, thus advocating for our existence in a patriarchy. Candace says that this is a biological difference and not a systemic inequality. So she just says that men are naturally more inclined to violence and aggression. All right, so up next we got Adam, and this guy actually came to play ball. It's quite nice. I got what I wanted, so we got 3 arguments down. So Adam started off very clearly stating on what basis he was objecting. He said, "We live in a patriarchy because there is no paid maternity leave and abortion access for women." He did also raise the sexual violence case, but A, they didn't actually get into discussing that, and B, that was already brought up before, so I'm not going to remap that. These are his 2 crucial points. Candace basically just says women don't need the right to abortion because abortion is bad. The next one was much more interesting. Candace Owens says, who pays for maternity leave and how can small businesses function? And she was also saying that they can't afford it, so small businesses wouldn't be able to afford maternity leave. Adam responded that maternity leave for small businesses would be covered by the federal government, and maternity leave does not harm small businesses that much, like the absence of employees. So yeah, Adam responds that maternity leave for small businesses would likely be covered by the federal government if they can't afford it, and maternity leave does not harm small businesses that much. And that was what we got out of that, but I thought that was nice. There's some verticality to that. All right, so the 4th and final conclusion here is a strange one. It's feminism has made things easier for men. So this is Candace's ultimate conclusion going against feminism, and she's saying that feminism making things easier for men is a bad thing for the woman. So Jenny is the first one up to bat, and Jenny starts talking to Candace and kind of asks her, why do you feel this way? And Candace says that men don't have to commit anymore. Candace says that hookup culture has been bad for the woman, and says that men don't have to work as hard for women anymore. which she's using in kind of two ways. Men don't have to work as hard for women anymore, thus devaluing the women. Also, men don't have to work as hard for women anymore, so they have less incentive to contribute to society. So I'll just map that. Since hookup culture being a net negative for women does not directly interact with the ultimate claim, it's not going to get mapped. What's kind of funny is Jenny actually agrees with the ultimate conclusion. Jenny says that feminism has made certain things easier for men, like emotional intelligence. So she's kind of saying that feminism making things easier for men doesn't necessarily mean that feminism is bad for women. And she talks about how men being emotionally intelligent is also a good thing for women, And yeah, that was Jenny. All right, we had two short ones, so I'm going to cover them both at once. First up is Audrey, who says that Candace is contradictory. She says that Candace is saying that we live in a matriarchy, but also men are benefiting more from feminism than women. So how can she play both sides, where she's advocating for the women having all the benefit on one hand and then the men having all the benefit on the other hand? And Candace doesn't really address this, but this doesn't address the ultimate claim either. Audrey, again, supports the ultimate claim here, but says that it's beneficial for both men and women that people don't have the same ideology that they used to have around dating, where you have to rush relationships just because sex is reserved for people who are committed, essentially. And she says that has made relationships a lot better for both men and women. And then they kind of talk tangentially for a while. I'm not going to complain about every person who does this. I'll just talk about it later. But then comes Zola. Zola is a sex worker who says that Candace lacks clarity in her definitions, because in a previous tangent, Candace said that because of the sexual revolution, women just give themselves up easier, and as such, they devalue themselves. And Zola says that she's a sex worker, but she also is celibate, and therefore she's kind of the falsification condition for what Candace was talking about. And Candace just kind of apologizes and says that people make generalizations in arguments, and that's about it. So yeah, nobody really seemed all that interested in addressing this ultimate conclusion. Not even really Candace. I mean, maybe a little bit. All right, and for our last argumentator, we have Catherine. So Catherine, you'll see for some reason I'm over on this screen. That's because Catherine wasn't really talking about this stuff over here. Catherine was instead talking about the biological difference and kind of got into the nature versus nurture divide. So let's rehash this really quick. Men are more violent towards women than the inverse. This is a biological difference, not a systematic inequality. Catherine was saying that what we perceive as biological difference is actually a lot more socially influenced than we give credit for, than Candace is giving credit for. Candace responds by biological influence is more nuanced than feminists want it to be, talking about how, like, her son's first word was car. Kids just naturally gravitate towards different things. And they didn't really give super detailed arguments for this, so this is kind of what we're left with. Yeah, I mean, these are arguments, let me tell you. And I only had to do half of the video right now. The other half I already had done a while ago. This has given me a migraine. I have quite a bad migraine now. But let's start over here with these pretty easy ones. So, actually, before I begin my review, I should just give some general thoughts on the Jubilee format, because there have been kind of relevant developments in the sort of Jubilee debacle, the public discourse surrounding whether Jubilee is or is not a productive thing, a valuable thing. So this video with Andrew Callahan came out, and we actually got to learn a little bit about how the behind the scenes at Jubilee works. Andrew Callahan, he's a journalist, and what he went on to do was to talk to conspiracy theorists. But rather than making inflammatory statements and being, aggressive and angry, Andrew Callahan worked really hard to understand the people he was debating. Now, granted, he didn't offer rebuttals where rebuttals probably should have been given were this a formal debate. I'm not saying that this thing with Andrew Callahan is what we should be striving for But I do think it's interesting to see that we now have substantiation that Jubilee actively eggs on people to essentially just get into this sort of clip farming, mud flinging competition, that really is insubstantial in terms of moving a discourse. So Jubilee's format is fundamentally flawed from an argumentative perspective, but it is not flawed from the perspective of its CEOs, which are making a lot of money because this is very stimulating content, These videos will make you feel something, but whether or not they're making you think, the jury is still out. Anyways, let's get into the review now. So we'll start off with the smaller branches. Feminism has made things easier than men. This was a bit of a funny claim because, as I forget the lady's name, but one of them did point this out. As Audrey pointed this out, this just is contradictory with some of the other stuff that she's said, that feminism is making things harder for men. Like when she was talking about the Me Too movement, she was saying that things were harder for men. But when she shifted gears and she said that things are making it easier for men, she seemed to be operating under the pretense that kind of like a Twitter caricature of a feminist, where the feminist is going to go, oh, it's making it easier for men, it must be bad for women. Whereas I think what we saw with this base of people, at least some of them, that one lady started talking about how, men's mental health really matters, and that seemed to catch her off guard a significant bit. So Candace supported this by saying that men don't have to work as hard for women anymore, and one of the argumentators even supported it by saying that feminism has made emotional intelligence easier for men. There wasn't much interacting with the ultimate claim here. A lot of the feminists actually agreed with it. What they disagreed with was whether this was bad. That it was bad, that it was easy, that it made things easier for men. Moving on here, Candace's claim, no career will give women as much joy and fulfillment as raising children. This was a horribly unproductive section of the video. Candace supported this by saying that raising children is biologically inherent, while other avenues in the pursuit of fulfillment are not. And the implicit claim there is that which is biologically natural coincides with joy and fulfillment. This is nothing. This was 20 minutes of my life wasted. All right, now we get to something with substance. Candace's claim, we live under a matriarchy, not a patriarchy. And Candace's original arguments in support of this is that the patriarchy is a system run by men that disadvantages women because men run things. She says that women are not disadvantaged as they can vote, and that men running things does not mean women are disadvantaged, as she evidenced with her spending statistics, that men make most of the money. Well, men make more money. Women do most of the spending or the allocating of funds, essentially. I thought this was interesting. I thought people could have picked at it a little bit more, or at all, really. No explicit objections were given to this argument over here. I guess the main reason that people weren't biting over here, though, is just because she was using a bit of an unorthodox definition for patriarchy. She was kind of playing fast and loose with it a little bit. One of the argumentators said, a patriarchy is a system in which men make the laws and run the government, and men make up the majority of the House of Representatives and the Senate. Therefore, the ultimate conclusion will be false. And Candace's objection is that this is a biological difference, that men are in the government and women usually aren't as much in the government. Here's another point by Candace supporting her ultimate conclusion. The women are taken more seriously in complaints than men. This is kind of interesting. It's especially interesting when juxtaposed with this over here. One of the argumentators objected to this. This was Princella. So yeah, Princella wanted to stick with her definition, and that's why they couldn't see eye to eye on this issue. We have an argumentator's objection to the ultimate conclusion that men are more violent towards women than the inverse. This is taken as going against the idea that we live in a matriarchy and not a patriarchy. Candace objected to this by saying that this is a biological difference, not a systemic inequality. And the argumentator objected, saying that this is more influenced by nurture rather than nature. Candace stood her ground, saying that biological influence is more nuanced than feminists want it to be. And that's what we got there. One of the argumentators said that we live in a patriarchy because there's no paid maternity leave and abortion access for women. This being actually playing with Candace's original definition, saying that women are disadvantaged. Candace said that abortion is just bad and therefore shouldn't contribute to the argument. But she also says that, you know, maternity leave is, paid maternity leave specifically, is bad because of how it makes small businesses struggle. The guy that was arguing with her had a degree in economics and said that maternity leave for small businesses would be covered by the federal government, and maternity leave does not harm small businesses as much as she was saying it would. This obviously was actually quite decent. I like that we managed to get all the way down here, even though these two actually came from a later debate because they just wanted to do anything but actually interact with those ultimate conclusions. And now the first ultimate conclusion that Candace had, I still think the most kind of productive discussion here, even though it's very horizontal. This is the one where we had the most people interacting with the ultimate claim, like actually. So her ultimate claim was the sexual revolution has devalued women and made them infinitely less happy. This is an objection from one of the ladies. 60% of women who are murdered by their intimate partners. And then two implicit claims here are the sexual revolution increased women's ability to escape these harmful situations, and women are happier when they can escape dangerous environments. As you can see by the yawning abyss down here, we have lots of things that should have gotten commented on or addressed or responded to that didn't. I would like to see Candace respond to this stuff, you know, just like I would like to see the argumentators respond to this stuff. But yeah, we just kind of have to leave it there. Candace, supporting her ultimate conclusion, says that women going into the workforce does not make them more happy because they would be happier caring for their children and staying at home and making sandwiches. Now we get two arguments. So the first argument is the sexual revolution gives women the opportunity to seek employment. This, with empowerment, gives people a sense of value, goes against the idea that the sexual revolution has devalued women because the sexual revolution has empowered women. No direct response. The only thing that you could take as kind of an implied response is Candace talking about how things that this person views as empowerment she finds just harmful to women. Another argument is the sexual revolution helped to normalize sex education. Sex education helped us to reduce STIs, abuse, and sexual assault, which might not have an effect on the value of women, but it would probably make you a lot less happy. You know, you have an STI versus if you don't have an STI, or if you're being abused versus not being abused. So we have an argument from Candace that family is what makes women happy, and the sexual revolution led to less families. Therefore, the sexual revolution has made them less happy. One of the ladies said that the Nordic countries are less family-centered and more happy. Candace objected to this twice, saying that behavioral science is fake and Nordic countries have a higher suicide rate. And I didn't map it because the person didn't really say it like an objection, more like a consideration, but somebody did say that maybe the suicide rate isn't an accurate indicator of the happiness of a given country, which I think is actually a really interesting idea. All right, and we have two more arguments. So, one of the argumentators said that rape rates are a viable way to determine the objectification of women. This was Nikki. And rape rates have gone down since the sexual revolution. Therefore, women are valued higher. Nikki supported this by saying that rape is caused mainly by objectification. Candace took away from it by saying that women are more objectified now than the 1950s, so this is not true. And Nikki responds to this by saying that Candace is really talking about like sexual commodification rather than objectification as a whole. And finally, one more argument. The sexual revolution gives women more freedom, and more freedom means more happiness, so we have a very broad claim here. And Candace's objection to more freedom meaning more happiness is that women having to deal with finances makes them less happy. So yeah, I guess that was the Candace Owens debate. It's not that Candace Owens is incapable of having a substantial conversation, or that the people on this show are incapable of having a substantial discussion. It's just that the format is specifically designed almost against anything productive, as evidenced by these two guys right here. Understand that this is like 40 minutes right here, which is unbelievable. Now, granted, they were saying things, but they weren't communicating in any sort of productive way. What they were doing is just mudflinging and just participating in a culture war and not really contributing anything new to the discourse. But yeah, I'm going to go take some pain medication for my headache. I hope you all enjoyed this. Please let me know what you think. Give me some feedback on the format of my videos. I'm trying to improve a little bit. Let me know what you want to see mapped next. Like, subscribe, all that fun stuff, and I will be back in the next one. Have a good one.